If you've watched any of our videos covering the literature review process, you'll know that synthesizing the existing literature is absolutely essential. But what exactly does this mean, and how do you go about synthesizing everything that you've read? Well, in this video, we'll answer exactly that question. Let's do it. Hey, Derek here from Grad Coach. If it's your first time here, the Grad Coach channel is where we discuss all things research related so that you can approach your project with confidence and competence. This particular video is based on an extract from our popular online course, Literature Review Bootcamp. In the course, we walk you through the full process of developing an A-grade literature review step by step. If it's your first time writing a literature review, you definitely want to check that out. And as a thank you for watching this video, we've got a massive 60% discount offer for you. You can find the link to that in the description. And with that out of the way, let's talk synthesis. First things first, let's quickly define exactly what we mean when we use the word synthesis, at least within the context of a literature review. Simply put, synthesis means going beyond just describing what everyone has said and what everyone has found. Instead, synthesis is about bringing together all of the information from the various sources that you've reviewed to present a cohesive assessment of the current state of knowledge in relation to your research aims and research questions. Put another way, a good synthesis tells the reader exactly where the current research is at in terms of the topic that you're interested in. In other words, what's known, what's not known, and where there's a need for more research. So, how do you go about actually doing this? Well, there's no one right way when it comes to synthesizing literature, but we found it particularly useful to ask yourself 5 key questions when you're working on your literature review, and then make sure that you address and answer these questions in some way within your actual write-up of your literature review chapter. So in this video, we're going to take a look at each of these 5 key questions. The very first question that you need to ask yourself is, overall, what things seem to be agreed upon by the majority of the literature, or at least the majority of the researchers? For example, if your research aim is to identify which factors contribute towards job satisfaction, in other words, which factors make people happy and satisfied in their job, then you're going to need to identify which factors are broadly agreed upon and sort of settled within the literature, within the existing research. This is really an essential starting point because you don't want to reinvent the wheel when it comes to your literature search or your literature review. And you certainly don't want to run down a road investigating something that's already really well established. So addressing this question first lays a foundation of settled knowledge for the rest of your literature review. Related to this, but on the other end of the spectrum, is an equally important question, and that is, where do the disagreements lie within the literature? In other words, which things are not fully agreed upon by the current researchers? Now, it's important for me to say that by disagreement, I don't mean that the researchers are fighting over a tooth and nail, or at least not necessarily fighting over a tooth and nail. I just mean that there's a relatively mixed batch of findings within the empirical research, and that there's no real clear consensus between researchers as to what the answer is to a specific question or regarding a certain matter. This is a really important question to address because these disagreements, or mixed findings at least, will often set the scene for your research gap, or at least for the research gap within the literature. In other words, these disagreements present opportunities for further research, and that is exactly what your study is going to address, or at least hopefully is going to address. If you're not familiar with the concept of a research gap, be sure to check out our explainer video covering exactly that. You can find the link to that in the description. The next key question that you need to answer is, which key theories are coming up over and over? Now, within most research spaces, unless you are researching something completely novel, you're going to find that as you digest the literature, you keep coming across a handful of key theories that are repeatedly referred to and cited within the literature. Apart from just identifying and taking a note of these key theories, you'll also want to think about how they're connected to each other. For example, are they all sort of covering the same ground, or do they have different focal points? Do they all define the key concepts and constructs and variables in the same way? Or is there some disconnect in terms of how they're defining these things? If that is the case, if there are different definitions being thrown around, what's the impact of this in terms of how you understand these theories and how they connect to each other? Long story short, you need to pay attention to the key theories in your research area, as these are going to need to feature within your theoretical framework, which is a critically important part of your final literature review or literature review chapter. If you're not familiar with the concept of a theoretical framework, we do cover this in quite a bit of detail in Literature Review Bootcamp. So again, as a thank you for watching this video, we are offering that 60% discount, and you can take advantage of that using the link in the description. The next question that you need to address in your literature review is an important one, and that is what contexts have and haven't been covered in the existing research. For example, sticking with our earlier hypothetical topic, and that is factors that impact job satisfaction, you may find that most of the research has been done on a white-collar management type sample, primarily within a Western context, but that very little has been done on, say, blue-collar workers in an Eastern context. Now, given the significant socio-cultural differences between these two groups, this is really an important observation because it could present a significant research gap. Simply put, you need to carefully assess the context of each piece of literature that you're engaging with, especially the empirical research. In other words, the studies that have collected and analyzed real-world data. Ideally, you should keep notes regarding the context of each study in some sort of catalog or spreadsheet so that you can easily make sense of this before you start the writing phase. If you'd like, our free literature catalog worksheet does a great job of this, and you can access that for free using the link in the description. Last but definitely not least, you need to ask yourself the question, what types of research methodologies have and haven't been used in the empirical studies that I'm looking at? For example, you might find that most studies that you're looking at have approached the research topic using qualitative methods such as interviews and thematic analysis, for example. Alternatively, you might find that most studies have used a quantitative approach, perhaps using surveys and statistical analysis. Whatever the case may be, you need to pay attention to this because it can impact your study in one of two potential ways. If, for example, you find that the vast majority of studies use a specific methodological approach, let's say a qualitative approach and thematic analysis, then this could provide you with a firm foundation on which to base your own study's methodology. On the other end of the spectrum, you might argue that the lack of methodological diversity, so to speak, presents a research gap, and therefore your study will take an alternative approach, let's say a quantitative approach, in an attempt to contribute towards filling that research gap. Of course, if you're going to go against the methodological grain, you will need to provide a really strong justification for why this makes sense within the context of your study. Regardless of which way you go, it's something worth considering, and you definitely want to pay very close attention to the methodologies used in the studies that you're looking at. Again, it's useful to keep track of all of this information in some sort of catalog or spreadsheet, and so do consider grabbing a copy of our free literature catalog if you don't have anything in place. All right, so we've now looked at the 5 important questions that you need to ask and, of course, answer to help you develop a strong synthesis within your literature review. To recap, these are: 1, which things are broadly agreed upon within the current research; 2, which things are the subject of disagreement or at least present mixed findings; 3, which theories seem to be central to your research topic and how do they relate to or compare to each other; 4, which contexts have and haven't been covered within the existing empirical research; and 5, which methodological approaches are most common. Importantly, you're not just asking yourself these questions for the sake of asking them. This isn't a reflection exercise. What you need to do is weave the answers to these questions into your actual literature review chapter when you write it up. How exactly you do that will, of course, vary from project to project depending on the structure that you adopt for your study, but you still need to address these core questions within your literature review, whichever route you end up going. I'd strongly encourage you to spend time actually writing out your answers to these questions as opposed to just thinking about them in your head. Putting your thoughts onto paper really helps you flesh out your thinking. As you do this, don't just write down the answers. Instead, think about what all these things mean in terms of, one, the research gap that you're going to present, and two, the methodological approach that you're going to take. Your literature review needs to lay the groundwork for these two things, that is, the research gap and your methodology. So it's essential that you link all of these things together in your mind and, of course, on paper. All right, so that brings us to the end of this video. If you want to learn more about how to craft an A-grade literature review, do be sure to check out Literature Review Bootcamp, where we deep dive into all of the concepts that we've discussed here today. Alternatively, if you'd like to get hands-on help developing your literature review, be sure to check out our private coaching service where we hold your hand through the entire research journey step by step. You can learn more about that and book a free consultation over at gradcoach.com. Until next time, good luck.